I say welcome. I'm glad you were able to join us and got the link to work. We have our faculty, we have Robin, of course, and some fantastic art students and NSU students here. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Not a problem.
Yes, welcome. Are we about ready to get started, do you think?
Yeah, I'm ready.
So I just want to invite our attendees to turn their cameras on. Of course, you don't have to, but students and faculty, anyone joining with cameras off, we'd love to see you for a moment, and so that you can also see our guest speaker, who we are so honored to have. Okay, I'll turn it over to our faculty.
Okay, welcome everybody. Hi, I am Miriam Ahmed, Assistant Professor of Graphic Design in the Department of Communication, Media, and the Arts. And with me are my colleague, Associate Professor of Art, Candy Lopez Moreno, and Dr. Shanti Bruce, the Chair of our department. So thank you all for joining us for the fourth and final lecture of our Art and Design Program's Winter 2021 Know Your Worth series. Earlier this winter, we had workshops and lectures led by Javaria Faruqi, Josh Lida, as well as Guy Harvey. And Guy Harvey also served as the juror for our annual student exhibition, which we invite you all to check out. It's in Gallery 217 in the UC, and I'll post the gallery hours in the chat. There you go. So this year, we're also launching our first student graphic design exhibition. It's a virtual online exhibition, and the opening reception is on Friday, April 23rd. I'll put the info for that in the chat too. There it is. Additionally, we also invite PBA students to apply for the James and Nan Farquhar Performing and Visual Arts Grant, which is an award of $500 up to $3,000 per year. So please apply. And again, I'll put the information for that in the chat. There you go. And of course, we have an Instagram page. We invite you to get news and updates from our Instagram, which is NSU Art Design. We post upcoming events and student artwork there. For example, you can see the installation pictures from the fantastic murals that our students have just completed at the library, the CCR lunchroom, and also at Zona Village. And of course, we invite you to go visit the murals in person if you can. We'll also be posting more details about our next lecture series for the fall, which will focus on how evolving technology influences and integrates with the art market. So one last thing in the chat coming to you guys there. And we get to the good part of today. So our guest today is Say Adams. He's our fourth speaker for the Know Your Worth series. And as creatives, we constantly question how much our output costs and how much we are worth. So the Winter 2021 Art and Design Know Your Worth lecture and workshop series is meant to help emerging artists and designers navigate the business side of creative entrepreneurship. So Say Adams emerged from the downtown graffiti movement to exhibit alongside fellow artists Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring. He's from New York, and he appeared in the historic PBS documentary called Style Wars, which tracks subway graffiti in New York. He was the creative director for Russell Simmons at Def Jam Recordings, where he co-founded the Drawing Board, which is Def Jam's in-house visual design firm. And Say Adams is the guy responsible for many of Def Jam's iconic design work, including visual identities, album covers, logos, ad campaigns for Run DMC, Beastie Boys, LL Cool J, Public Enemy, Notorious B.I.G., Maroon 5, even Jay-Z. And that was just when he was a graphic designer. As an artist, he draws inspiration from 60s pop art, sign painting, vintage comics, and his work focuses on themes of pop culture, brand identity, and cultural and community issues. These days, when he's not creating incredible collages, Say exhibits, lectures, and leads workshops at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, at the MoMA, at the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, and right here in Broward, Say also works closely with Business for the Arts of Broward, hi Robin, to support the local art community. And today he is here to tell us about his career from Def Jam and beyond, and show us some of his work highlights and share some insights that will help us understand our worth as visual communicators. Thank you, Say, for joining us.
I'm happy to be here. So, you know, I will just say that, you know, like Miriam mentioned, I am a New York City artist. I started out when I was a teenager as a graffiti writer, and my career is, you know, had a lot of twists and turns, and we'll get into it really quickly because there's quite a bit to cover. So if you start the first slide, and when I stop talking, you can just go to the next one. So this is a piece that I did back in the 70s when I was doing preliminary sketches for paintings on subway trains. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. So this is an actual subway train that I painted in the early 80s. And this was, you know, what my friends and I did. We would go out in the middle of the night, excuse me, and we would paint subway trains and try to be back before morning, before our parents went to work. And so this was how I got my start. So this is a piece that I made in 1981. In downtown New York, there was a graffiti gallery that basically trained myself and my friends. And I think I was maybe 18, 19 at the time. And again, this was one of those opportunities where I would make paintings and then they would sell them and represent me. And we worked together for quite a few years. This is the full painting that you just saw called Graffiti City. And a lot of the work that I did was primarily with the same materials I used for graffiti. So it was spray paint and magic markers. And this is also when I started to learn how to use acrylic paint. So this is a logo that I created back in the early 80s for the Beastie Boys. And this is one of the relationships that I've had for many, many years. And we'll get into a little bit more about that then. But at the time, logo design was something I was very much interested in. So in 1984, I met Rick Rubin and Russell Simmons when they were forming Def Jam. And they gave me what I felt like was the second great opportunity of my life to design for Def Jam. One of the first artists that I worked with was LL Cool J. And these are a couple of his album covers on the right. And on the left side are photographs from some of the photo sessions that we did with various artists and photographers, I should mention. So another act that I worked very closely with over the years was Public Enemy. And this was an album cover that I did called Fear of a Black Planet. And to give you an idea of how long ago this was, this past summer, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of this record. So it's quite a long time ago. So I imagine that a lot of you are familiar with the Notorious B.I.G. So these are some of the records that I did for him. The bottom two are singles, but the one on the top is his debut record, Ready to Die. And these are some of the photographic outtakes of the baby that we used on the cover. So DMX, sadly, is somebody who's in the news right now who's not doing too well. But I worked with him very closely with all of his records. And these are his first 3 releases that I art directed. And my friend Jonathan Mannion took all the photography. Another artist that I spent a lot of time working with for many years is Jay-Z. And again, this was a situation where I teamed up with Jonathan Mannion, and he took all the photography. The three of us collaborated very closely together for many, many years. And he's somebody that I'm really proud to say that I'm still working with to this day. So this is just a small overview of some of the album and CD covers that I designed over the years, working with Def Jam and some of the other record labels as well. And it's everybody from Mary J. Blige to, Montel Jordan, third base, like I said, DMX, Beastie Boys. And, with these, the thing that I loved to do the most was logo design. So what I tended to do a lot of times was I would art direct the photo shoots. I'd have to go out on location, and then I'd come back into the studio and I'd work on the logos, and I'd let various members of my team work on the layout. But each one of these, just so you understand, had 3 singles with it, and then all kinds of marketing materials as well. So each one of these squares represents a whole, campaign for each of these artists. So like I mentioned, logo design is one of those things that I'm really excited about doing. And so over the years, I spent quite a bit of time designing logos for all kinds of brands. Hot 97 is a popular radio station here in New York. And as you can see, Mary J. Blige in the center, Beastie Boys, Foo Fighters, and various others as well. One of the artists that I'm heavily associated with also is Dave Chappelle. And so that's his logo on the left. A Tribe Called Quest is another artist that I've worked with quite a bit. LL Cool J, Don Henley is in a band called the Eagles. They're a big rock band from the 70s and 80s. And again, logo design is something that I'm really passionate about. I spend a lot of time trying to decide how to create the best image for each particular client. So this is a piece that I made for Muhammad Ali, and Adidas commissioned me to do this for a line of shoes and apparel. And I made the painting in my studio with, silk screen and traditional graphics. And then I would go ahead and add that to the palette, and then we would create the garment from there. But a lot of this was a collaboration with Adidas, and we would sort of go back and forth looking at samples and color swatches. But the thing I'm most proud of is this was an opportunity for me to have my own signature collection with my name on it. This is a line of luggage and backpacks that I did for JanSport. This was an artist series that myself and a bunch of other artists did. And this was an opportunity for me to basically spread my wings a little bit and do a campaign that was centered around all the things that I loved in hip hop. And so, a lot of the graphics talk about peace, love, and unity in hip hop, because back in the day, that was what we focused on, was this idea of collective unity. So like I mentioned before, Dave Chappelle is one of those artists that I spent a lot of time working with. And recently he went out on tour and he asked me to create the graphics for his tour. And so while this is the original logo that we did, then I also did a whole line of t-shirts and marketing materials and merchandise for his tour as well. This is one of the t-shirts that I did. It's modeled after a vintage New York City subway token. And Dave is one of those artists that gives you a lot of freedom to do what you do. And I'm proud to say that he's somebody that I'm still working with as well. This is a 3-story mural that I did for the 30th anniversary of Foot Locker. And so this is inside their flagship store in Herald Square near 34th Street, across the street from Macy's. And so this is what you see when you walk in, and just shy to the left is a giant escalator that takes you all the way up to the top floor. And you can see every bit of the mural when you're riding up the escalator. So recently, Google approached me about doing the graphics for a Google Doodle. And at the time, I didn't know what a Google Doodle was, but they had this idea that they wanted to celebrate the birthday of hip hop, which at the time they calculated it to be about 44 years old. And next year, hip hop will be turning 50. So that gives you an idea of how long hip hop has been around. And this was the final piece that we created. And I'm happy to say, if any of you are familiar with Google Doodles, right now, well, not right now, but when we're done, you can go to Google and Google the words Google Doodle, and you can put my name in there or hip hop, and this graphic will come up, and you can DJ and spin the records, and you can learn all about the early days of hip hop history. And I encourage everybody to check it out, because it's a lot of fun to play with this interactive doodle, and you can actually learn to scratch and DJ. So in 2018, Levi's approached me about doing an outdoor installation to launch their new Times Square flagship store. And so I created all these graphics for the outside. And then I also went inside and did a whole series of graphics for the inside of the store as well. So these are some of the collage paintings that I've been making recently. So after doing graffiti, doing album design, doing package design, and working with apparel, I decided to go back into the studio and start making art. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to learn how to use a different medium other than spray cans. And so I stumbled upon doing collage art, working with small grade school children. And these are the pieces that I started to create. These are all small, 20 inches by 20 inches, and it's 100% handmade paper. So these are two pieces that I created for my friends Beastie Boys. The one on the right is a celebration of my friend Adam Yauch, who passed away in 2012. And so I wanted to do something to celebrate his memory. But I also wanted to keep these pieces sort of unique, because they were, friends of mine from the early days, and we spent a lot of time together. And so this is an homage to them. So when I started making these collage pieces, I decided that I wanted to celebrate my favorite brands. So I came up with this name called Trusted Brands as a way of celebrating the logo designs that I loved as a kid growing up. And so this is one of the first pieces that I made. And you'll notice in a lot of my pieces that they're usually squares. And so you'll always see a sort of geometric shape within the piece as a way of me incorporating a little bit of texture and detail. And again, all these pieces are made with handmade papers, vintage newspapers, vintage magazines, a little bit of acrylic. And one of the things that I'm really proud of is that, my goal was to try to figure out a way to paint with paper. And that's one of the things that for me was really exciting, tackling this new medium, is that I didn't have any preconceived ideas of what was possible. I just wanted to have fun in the studio. So when I started thinking about trusted brands, I asked myself, what is the #1 brand in America? And my answer was the American flag. And so I wanted to do an homage to one of my favorite artists from the 60s, Jasper Johns, who created the American flag. And so I wanted to do my version of the American flag, but I wanted to do it in collage. And so this is one of the pieces that I came up with.
Say, I have a question about your art pieces and how you put them together. I know we were gonna, put the questions for last, but my memory is not that great. You have these like floral flowers that get repeated in a lot of your pieces. Is there a particular magazine or image online or something that you've taken to create these kinds of images over and over again?
That is a handmade fiber paper that I buy at, my favorite art supply, and paper stores here in New York City. And it's called Floating Flowers. And it's made in India and Nepal. And it's sort of a combination of these handmade paper fibers and wax and pigment. And they're really great. You can find them at blick.com, and they ship everywhere throughout the US. And, sometimes you can find them at your favorite art supply store because they really are everywhere and they come in a bunch of different colors. And it was just something that I fell in love with. And if you look in the white areas, you'll see them again. And most of the time, if you look at my work, you will see that floating flower pattern somewhere in there because I absolutely love the feeling and the texture, and they're just so beautiful to work with. So this is a black flag that I created, and this was inspired by the idea that I wanted to do something that sort of takes people's eye away from the red, white, and blue, because while I love making those flags, when I'm working in red, white, and blue, people think I'm trying to make a patriotic statement, and I'm not really. I'm just interested in the storytelling aspect. And I think that the American flag is a great canvas for something like that because you can tell so many interesting stories within those stars and stripes. And here's a large version. This is the piece that I created for the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. And this is one of the first museums dedicated to the history and culture of African American people. And so they asked me to create a piece on the National Mall when President Obama was doing the ribbon cutting ceremony in 2016. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to create this giant image for storytelling opportunities. And so if you look carefully in between the stars and stripes, you'll see all kinds of people represented, from Harriet Tubman to Tony Bennett to Muhammad Ali and Angelo Dundee, Katharine Hepburn, all kinds of folks, poets, writers, artists, musicians. I wanted to show that the American flag is made up of a universal people. It's not just one person or another, it's everybody. And, it's one of those things that we're sort of experiencing right now. So I think it's really appropriate that I made this piece before all the events that have taken place during the pandemic. And it sort of just shows that a lot of these things are more about us coming together than anything else. So after being in the studio and making work, I decided that it was time to go back outside and return to my roots when I was painting graffiti. But this time I wanted to do murals to beautify not only my city, but other cities around the country. But instead of just painting my name, I thought it would be fun to do something different. And I felt like love was a universal message that needed no explanation. So I go around the country and I paint love murals. And this is one that I did in Boston in 2017. And these murals are really large. It's sort of hard to get a sense of it. You might be able to tell here. This is a love mural that I did in New Bedford, Massachusetts in 2018. And again, the idea is really just to spread this message of positivity and hope. But also, I love working with bright colors. And this was an opportunity for me to do just that. This is a love mural I did also in 2018 in Jackson, Michigan. And these murals take upwards of, 5 to 7 days, sometimes even longer. So I'm literally in a given city for the better part of a week before I move on to the next city. And so this is an image of myself in Iowa City, Iowa. And whenever I'm traveling, I always stop off at a local university or a public school, and I talk to students about my journey, very similar to what we're doing right now, only we would be together in person. And for me, it's a great way to give back to not only the community, but to educate young people about my journey. And it's just so much fun to be able to have an opportunity to do this sort of work. And so I can't be, any prouder to have an opportunity to really, be in front of people and speak about not only the work that I do, but, my journey getting to this point. And yes, every one of the murals that I painted was by hand, by myself. Once in a while, I'll be lucky enough to have an assistant, but I'm the one that does everything. Usually, I'll project the design onto the wall, and then I'll go in and I'll hand paint it. And most of the time, I don't use spray paint. I always use latex because I want the lines to be really crisp and clean. And so it takes quite a bit of time and a lot of focus. And so that is my last slide. And I want to thank you for listening to me. Well, actually, there are a couple of others, but this is, again, just me, with students around the country. Oh, I forgot that there's actually more on here. This is a logo that I created for the Graffiti Museum in Miami. And so you guys are not that far away. So if you get an opportunity, stop by the Museum of Graffiti in Miami. I created the logo, and they thought it was great to go back to somebody that had graffiti roots from the community. And so it really makes me feel honored to be able to do something like that, considering I was one of those kids that came out of that community. This is an album cover that I did for the Smithsonian Anthology of Hip Hop and Rap. This is a box set of 9 CDs and a 300-page coffee table book illustrating the history of hip hop. I don't recommend that you guys go out and spend $150 on this, but if you can talk your parents into it, that would be great. It's a really beautiful book, and it's a great way to learn about the records as well that came before you. So it's basically a 40-year history. And then this was the last piece that I created before the pandemic really got crazy. And I did this for Robin and the folks at It's Sugar. And this was the best thing I could have done to finish out 2019, moving into 2020, because it was just so much fun to get to play with these colors and to literally be a kid in a candy shop. And I have such fond memories of being in Fort Lauderdale and hanging out with everyone there. And so hopefully when all of this is behind us, we'll get an opportunity to do that again. So now that is the last slide of my presentation. And I want to thank you for listening.
That was great. We have some questions in the chat that were popping up, but I was trying to like wait until, we get to the end because, I didn't want to miss any of the good stuff. Miriam, do you want to start with your question?
Sure. I was wondering about your graphic design era. I was wondering, in particular, how much input you had on the photo shoots. Like, did you get to choose the photographer that you worked with, or did you get to choose the models?
Everything, absolutely everything. You have to understand where I come from. Nobody had any formal training. Even if you went to school and you had a degree, it didn't train you for learning how to work with photographers and models and even the artists, explaining, to the stylist which jacket works better, discussing things with the photographers. Everything that I learned hands-on. That quote unquote bloodbath that DMX is in, that's all made from Kool-Aid and boxes and boxes of Rit food coloring and a lot of trial and error and hours to try to get these things right. And we just came up with these ideas, and then we would have to learn how to execute and come in on budget.
Who's the baby? Do you remember?
His name is right there in parentheses. His name is
Keith Roy.
Keith Roy Yearwood. And he is, I want to say he is probably 25, maybe 27 by now, because he was just a little baby when we did that. He might not have even been 2. And, the record is easily over 25 years old because you have to have been, your record has to have been made 25 years ago to be considered for induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And last year, Notorious B.I.G. was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that baby has been around for at least 25 years.
You sort of implied that back when nobody really had much training in this industry, you were kind of defining the field of graphic design back when you were doing this. Could you tell us a little bit more about what it was like to be working in a field that was evolving so quickly?
Well, I don't know if graphic design was evolving, but hip hop certainly was. And, you have to understand, when I got involved in graphic design, it was a secret society. It was like trying to learn filmmaking before digital technology. You had to know somebody that was willing to teach you. So learning how to do graphic design was very difficult because back then it was all cut and paste, and you had to learn how to use protractors and rulers and graphs and rapidographs, and you had to do mechanical drawings, and you would send those things to the printer, and then they would come back to you and they'd say, oh, this is wrong. And then you'd have to redo it and fix it. And this was a very expensive business back then. If you made a mistake, it would cost the record company or your client thousands of dollars, more than I was being paid. And, we sort of think of graphic design in a very different way now. You come up with an idea, you bang it out on your computer, you print it out, or you make a PDF. PDFs weren't even invented back then. There was no way to show people. You'd have to design it, send it someplace to get it printed. You couldn't even print it yourself because there was no computer. It was a lot of trial and error, I would just say that. And I could go into it, we could do a whole program just on graphic design and the ins and outs. And that doesn't even include the difficult things that I had to endure trying to learn these things as a young person of color when the whole industry was completely white.
We have another question specifically about NFTs. So the student asked, what do you think about the NFT space, and are you involved?
Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. In 2019, I was approached by a company called Nifty Gateway, and they're one of the leaders in NFTs. and they chased me for about 6 months to do an NFT, and I did not understand what it was. And strangely enough, many of the times when I was traveling to places like Fort Lauderdale, I would be on the phone with these guys and they would explain to me, exactly what an NFT was. And so it took them a long time to convince me to do one. But at the end of 2019 and early 2020, during the pandemic, I dropped my first NFT. And I have to say, I think we did about 5 different designs, and it was a lot of fun, and it did really well. I'm embarrassed to say how well it did, but what I ended up doing, I'm going to just shift my lens just so you can see that number 30 piece above the red piece. That was one of the first NFTs that I did. I just took a bunch of the digital files that I had and I turned it over to the company, and they made a whole series of NFTs for me because I didn't understand how to even create the art. And it was a lot of fun, and we're scheduled to do another drop this summer. But I was one of the early people that were on to NFTs, and there was nobody I could talk to, and nobody that I was friends with knew anything about it.
Once again, pioneering. So there's another question in the chat from Joanne, and I'm skipping a question because we were talking about the graphic design era before, and Joanne wants to know if you could tell us about your process when you created the iconic and groundbreaking pieces such as Mary's What the 411 or Ready to Die. She wants to know, did you listen to the albums first? Walk us through the process, if you could.
Oh, always. When you're making a record, the first thing you have to do is listen to the music. And so I'll give Mary as an example. Mary is from Mount Vernon, New York. She was maybe 18 at the time. And so we sat down and we listened to her record, and we talked about all the aspirational things that she wanted to achieve, and she wanted people to understand about the music. And so for me, the only reference I had was traditional R&B. I loved Anita Baker, even though Anita Baker came out in the 80s and Mary came out in the 90s. I just thought, most female R&B singers had a script, logo, and they probably didn't even call it a logo back in the 80s. So I would just practice my penmanship. And this really took me back to when I was in grade school. And I might have done 50 versions of that Mary J. Blige logo before I settled on what you now see. But what I would do is I would take, part of the Mary, if I had an M that I thought was better, I would sort of lay that down on paper, put a different M there. I would put, a J there, and I'd have to trim the sides and move it over so it would fit on a perfect line, and then put the Blige on there, and then make a Xerox and then white out the little, shadows around the letters. And that was how I created that logo. But I must have did that easily about 50 times. And that's still the way that I work to this very day. When I'm doing something handwritten, I'll just, write a bunch of different, things, and then I'll just take the letters and put them together if I can't get it perfect in one swoop. And very, very rarely do I get it, in one take.
That was great. Let's open it up, I think, to the students. For those that didn't write in the chat, do you guys have any questions for Say Adams? This is your time to ask.
There is actually one question from Tristan. Tristan, do you want to ask?
There we go.
Sure. So you kind of already answered about where you get the floral paper, but I was wondering if you have any tips for hand making paper, what materials do you use to make your own pulp, if you have any preference?
In 2019, right before the pandemic, I took a course right here in Brooklyn to learn how to make handmade paper, because I use so much of it that other people make. And it was a lot of fun, and it was very difficult. But the thing I remember the most is that it's way too time consuming for me. And it was also a very expensive class. I couldn't tell you anything about making paper except that it was a lot of fun, but man, was it a lot of work.
Thank you.
We have one more question. Daniel asks, what is the best takeaway of your work, as in a lesson?
Don't throw your mistakes away. It is something that I learned when I was really young. And from time to time, I have a very hard time at looking at scraps and mistakes. I'll start over, but I've learned not to throw them away because sometimes they'll inform you about A, what you did wrong, and B, you might be able to use it for something else later. And I know that sounds a little strange, but there are definitely moments where something's just not working, whether it's graphic design, whether it's something in the studio, and I'll always get an opportunity to reuse it. That, and I try to listen when I'm in the presence of somebody that really has been through the journey, because you can learn so much from people that have done, not only your work, but other things that you think aren't related. When I was a kid, I never had any interest in wood making. And now all my panels are made by craftsmen that are in wood shops. And so, had I paid attention, maybe I would have learned something that would have saved me from having to spend all this money to have somebody crafting these things in their studio. So I would just say, if you can, try not to throw anything away.
Any other questions?
I do. I say, it's really an honor to be here with you. I wanted to ask you, so what do you think now about album covers, right? In this digital medium that we're in? Because when I heard that you were coming, and I was like, wait, who? And all I had was a visual of my adolescence, growing up, right? My 20s, all of that era. And each album, the cover transported me right into that moment. I had no business talking about what's the 411 at 12 years old. That's neither here nor there, but I felt it. But when I saw the album cover, I was already there, right? So Ready to Die, immediately you're in that moment. It's a visual, it's a visual representation of the whole album as itself, right? But what about now? I want to know what's your take in this digital medium that we're in, and the value, or how do you see the artwork?
I still don't really understand how people interact with art as it relates to music today. I really don't, because I'm on the computer so much. When I'm listening to music, I'm on Spotify. Usually there's no graphic to go with it. I just accept it and I keep it moving. And I don't listen to much contemporary music. So even if you do see an album cover or two on Spotify, I don't know what it looks like, for Travis Scott or any of the others. I can't even remember this little girl's name that I love so much. That I just watched a documentary. This is so embarrassing. Oh my goodness. But anyway, somebody's got to help me now. What is this little girl's name? She's like 16 or 17, and her brother produced all her music, and she just won all these.
Billie Eilish.
Billie Eilish.
Billie Eilish. Yes. And the reason I have a hard time remembering her is because she was on a talk show and she didn't know who Elton John was. And I was like, okay, I'm done with you. But, I know her music because I hear it around a lot. But, the album artwork, it's like, it doesn't feel connected in the same way that it did back in the day, where you would sort of have an album in your room and you'd study it inside and out. I think young people just sort of move much faster, and maybe, there's no importance attached to it in the same way, because you could just put the thing in your pocket and listen to the music without really having to get into the graphics. So I don't even know if I really answered your question, but.
No, you did more than enough. Thank you.
Anyone else? We'll say thank you so much for taking out the time to spend with us. We totally appreciate it. There's a million comments on our chat if you want to read through it about how inspiring and amazing and insightful this has been. I think this is something that our students need, and young, people need, is to see and to hear about the career paths of someone who has made it, because as an artist, it tends to be a little bit more difficult to see an end result when there's people that don't understand your passion. So I really appreciate your time and giving us some insight. So thank you.
I'm happy to do it, and I'm happy that you all got an opportunity to ask some questions, because when I was your age, I didn't know anybody that did the kind of work I was interested in, nor could I ask questions about anything. But I will say, if anybody's interested, you could check out my Instagram, sayadams_archives, if you want to see some of the vintage stuff from back in the day. And then everything present day is just at Say Adams, all one word. But thank you so much for listening. And again, I'm happy to come back if you guys ever need me. And just keep making art and, keep pushing.
Can I ask one quickie question?
Yes.
Will you be at Art Basel? Are you considering?
Wow.
I'm sorry. I know you have to go, but I need to know.
No, but you know what? I'm so itching to see my friends, but I'm not gonna lie. I don't even know what that's gonna look like yet. But
with your work, amazing. Come on.
Thank you so much. You're really kind.
Thank you so much.
Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Day. It's been fantastic.
Hey, thank you so much for being here. We all appreciate it so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.